All right, y'all, welcome back to the next A&P lecture. This time we have connective tissue. So this will be our second part of our tissues lecture. First we did epithelial, and now we're going to be doing connective. So of the four types of tissue in our body, again, we've already done epithelial. Today we're doing connective. And we do eventually have whole units on the skeletal muscles and nervous system. I will be showing you a little bit of nervous tissue today, just like one slide of it from the textbook. So you will get to see what that looks like. And, or rather, but the main focus today is going to be connective tissue. But you do need to know all four types of these, like just that these are the four types of tissue in our body. So with connective tissue, what is it? It's the most abundant type of tissue in our body, and it's the most diverse, which for better or for worse, after you see the slides today, you might wish it wasn't so diverse because of how many things we have to know for A&P1. So it's not as straightforward as epithelial tissue, where we could really clearly name it with like the amount of layers that it had and the shape that it had. And it does more than just like connect different parts of the body. It offers a lot of support and protection for our body, and insulation, even storing food for like fuel for later use. So connective tissue has a ton of functions in our body, and we're going to go through each one and kind of talk about what it looks like and what some of its basic functions are. So within connective tissue, we have four main types, and then there are plenty of subtypes, which we're going to get to. But the four main types are proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. So it is a little bit weird to think about bones and blood as connective tissue, but they are types of connective tissue. And again, this is kind of what I said on the last slide with it does more than just connect different parts of our body. So like bones offer a ton of support, for example. One key aspect of connective tissue is that we can start to identify it based on certain characteristics of it. And the amount of vasculature that connective tissue gets can vary between the different types. And by vasculature, I mean like how much blood is going there. So cartilage, for example, is avascular. So of the proper connective tissue, it is typically highly vascular, besides the dense subtype. So we'll talk about what that subtype is in a little bit. For cartilage being avascular, if you've ever had an injury to cartilage in your body, those types of injuries tend to heal a little bit slower because they don't have access to blood. So it takes a long time or longer time than a more vascular structure to heal because it's not receiving nutrients as quickly from a nearby blood supply. So just something that you might have experienced before. Okay, so for the characteristics of connective tissue, all connective tissue has these three kind of layers or components to it. The ground substance, fibers, and cells. And cells is going to be really, really diverse. This could be a ton of immune cells. This could be blood cells. This could be cartilage cells. So the types of cells that we're going to see across the different types of tissue are going to be vastly different from one type to another. The ground substance, though, makes up what's called the extracellular matrix. Extracellular matrix. So if I were to draw just generic cell, the cell has like an inside and an outside, right? Like inside the cell membrane and outside the cell membrane. Well, outside the cell membrane, it's not just like hollow blank space. It's like the space that's filled with a bunch of cells, fibers. Those fibers might be collagen fibers, reticular fibers, elastic fibers, stuff like that. Then the ground substance is going to be a lot of like the just watery portions of this. So there's a ton of water, there's a ton of proteins, sugars, cells, fibers that are all kind of running in this extracellular matrix. So all of this would be all of this would be extracellular matrix. So connective tissue that we're looking at today is we're really trying to identify this extracellular matrix. And because there's so many components, you can imagine that it does get quite complicated to be able to tell what's in these components. Okay, so what types of connective tissue do we need to know for this class? We need to know the ones listed here. So we're going to break these up into their different categories. They're like subtypes because earlier I told you there's 4 main types. Of course, blood and bone are their own individual types of connective tissue. So I'll show you some of that later on. But then the other types over here of connective tissue are going to be loose connective tissue, which is our first 3. So we have areolar, adipose, and reticular connective tissue. Then we have dense connective tissue. This is another subtype. Then we have cartilage. A proper refers to like these. So loose and dense, and then cartilage, and then blood and bone. So sorry, proper is actually encompassing both loose and dense connective tissue. All right, so what does the outline of this lecture look like? We're really just going to go down each one of these and show you what it looks like. And here's a big table that helps just kind of put everything into one nice picture. We have the classes, we have the subclasses, right? So we have proper here, we have loose and dense under that, and then the subtypes even within that. We have the 3 types of cartilage. For bone, I'm not really going to be showing the difference between compact and spongy. I'm just going to show you bone tissue. The one I show you is going to be compact, but we're not really going to be highlighting the differences between compact and spongy in this lecture. So yeah, and then it has different stuff about its components and some of its general features. So this is just kind of an overview picture. Like I wouldn't necessarily study or take a ton of notes on this because we're going to look at each one individually and you'll start to learn kind of what's in it from each picture and how to identify it. All right, so we're going to start with areolar, and areolar is really nice because it's kind of a mixture of all of the types of connective tissue, or at least all of the proper types of connective tissue. So it has all of those general characteristics that connective tissue has, right? It has the ground substance, it has fibers, and it has cells. So those are the 3 components of connective tissue. And even though every type of connective tissue has these 3 components, areolar has like all of the possibilities of all of those components. So let's look at the fibers, for example. These are the possible fibers we see in connective tissue: collagen, elastic, and reticular. But there might be certain type of connective tissue that only has one of these, that has a really high concentration of reticular, for example, or maybe a really high concentration of collagen. Areolar, on the other hand, is kind of the prototype for connective tissue because it has like a little bit of everything. It has some fat cells, it has some immune cells over here, it has all the types of fibers. So it doesn't have anything in any particular like abundance, but it has a lot of everything. Because of that, areolar is found in a lot of different areas, and this is just kind of like a lot of supporting connective tissue for a lot of our organs. So we'll just kind of surround kind of the generic connective tissue. This will surround a lot of just important organs to offer support and structure. Here's what areolar looks like a little bit more under the microscope. We can see the different types of fibers over here and the elastic fibers that are highlighted. We see the ground substance, which is just like kind of these open white spaces over here. So we see a ton of ground substance that's not stained, and then different fibers as well. So a way to identify areolar is if you see these kind of pockets of white space with just like a ton of lines going around, because all of these lines are the different types of fibers that are staining here. Like I was mentioning on the previous slide, areolar connective tissue offers this function where it kind of wraps and cushions organs. So it's like that generic kind of connective tissue that surrounds a lot of our like vital organs. So if you see kind of these airy pockets, that is a sign that it's areolar connective tissue. And that's actually what areolar means, like kind of open blank spaces sort of thing. Okay, the next type of proper loose connective tissue we're looking at is adipose. This might be one of the easiest ones to identify because these little globs of fat are really easy to identify. So this are our fat storage. So you'll see these really big blobs, and those are creating, those aren't stained by the dye. So it creates these nice white pockets. And then on the edges of them, we see the really dark like nuclei here. So we see the nucleus of adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is stored in a ton of different areas around our body, and it serves as like a storage unit for our fat. So as we start to, like, if we were not eating, for example, we'd start to like deplete a lot of the glucose in our blood, and then we'd shift to like stored glucose, and then after that we'd start to shift towards like stored fat. So it's just like fuel reserves for our body in like times of emergency when we might need to tap into extra fuel storage. So our body stores this in our body stores this as adipose tissue. Okay, the last type of loose connective tissue is called reticular. It's called reticular because it has a large proportion of reticular fibers, these really, really dark stained reticular fibers. And these fibers are offering like a sort of support system, like a little weave of support system for a lot of various types of cells. So we see like blood cells, immune cells over here, like mast cells and macrophages. And these are typically found in areas that deal with these types of cells. So lymph nodes typically house our immune cells. Bone marrow will house our new blood cells that are being made. So it creates this mesh for support for blood cells and immune cells as well. So, right, like white blood cells are types of immune cells. They're identifiable because of these like really, really darkly stained reticular fibers. And then you see a ton of blood cells floating within kind of this region here. Okay, now we are on to dense. So this is dense regular connective tissue. Dense is a large proportion of collagen. And the purpose of dense connective tissue is to offer a lot of strength to areas that are moving or putting an area of the body under tension. So dense regular is often found in like tendons and ligaments. So tendons connect muscle to bone, and then ligaments connect bone to bone. So these are found in joints a lot because, of course, like if you were to move a joint around, you're moving that in a range of motion that is pulling on the muscle and on the tendons and the ligaments. So dense connective tissue has a lot of strength because of its collagen fibers that allows it to be put under tension. The first one we're looking at is dense regular. And we see a lot of the collagen fibers here. They're not staining as dark as the reticular fibers are on like the previous slide, for example. And these are all kind of running parallel to each other. Like you can imagine all of these fibers are like pointing in the same direction. And that way that they are able to withstand like stretch in that direction. So this would be like really good at like pulling left and right, for example. It would be able to handle a lot of tension when being pulled on either end. But sometimes we have dense tissue that is being pulled in a lot of different ways, like a lot of different angles. It's not just going left and right or up and down. And that's where dense irregular comes in. It still has a lot of collagen fibers, right? It says primarily arranged collagen fibers, but it has some elasticity to it as well. And this is also going to be found in joints, but joints that are a little bit more mobile. So you see here that the shoulder joint is highlighted, and that there's this kind of fibrous capsule around the joint. And if we think about the shoulder joint compared to something like your elbow joint, your shoulder has much more range of motion than something like the elbow does. So that means the kind of degrees that which you could stretch a lot of the ligaments or areas within this are more than just kind of two directional, right? Like it's not just an up and down or left and right. So because it has to twist and turn and be pulled in a lot of different directions, it has this additional connective tissue called dense irregular. Another really good place that dense irregular is found is under skin. So this is found under skin. And you can imagine that our skin is really good at stretching, right? Like you could kind of pull on the skin, like on your arm, for example. You could push it in a lot of different ways. It can really turn at any angle that you force it to turn. If you move your wrist, the skin on your forearm is like moving a lot. So because skin is able to be put under tension in so many different angles, right under the epithelial layer, we have a large amount of dense irregular connective tissue that gives skin its ability to have high tension, so it's like very durable, but also be able to exert that tension in a lot of different directions. Okay, the last dense type of tissue we're looking at is called elastic, and this one has primarily elastic fibers, as the name suggests. It's found typically in the walls of large arteries, so like the aorta is a really good example here, and that's what you're looking at here. In the wall of the aorta. So a lot of the blood vessels in our body, they need to have this elastic property where they can stretch when they kind of fill with blood, but then they can recoil back to their regular size when blood is being like pushed through them. So they have this ability, they have this elastic property to stretch and recoil. And what gives them that ability is the high amount of elastic connective tissue in the walls of their vessels. So this is typically found in walls of vessels. This would be like inside the tube. So this would be like the lumen of the tube up top, lumen of the tube, and then this would be like the back of the vessel, which means like any cells over here would be like the apical side. And then if there's like an epithelial layer right here, then like this end would be the basal side. And we'll actually end up looking at some epithelial a little bit later on. But anything that faces the lumen is typically called apical. Also, the reason why I'm naming these terms, even though they're relative to epithelial tissue, is because anything facing a lumen always has a layer of epithelial tissue. But also the aorta here has this huge amount of elastic tissue because it's such a thick elastic vessel. All right, the next one we're going to is cartilage. And the first one we're starting with is hyaline cartilage, and it has this kind of glassy look. That's actually what hyaline stands for. It means a sort of glassy look. And we're able to tell cartilage from other types of connective tissue because the target cells in this type of connective tissue, I feel like, are very, very identifiable. And they're called chondrocytes. So chondrocytes make cartilage here. But chondrocytes are always in these little lacunae. It's like these little white filled spaces here. It's just like some extra space for the chondrocyte, and it helps kind of encapsulate the chondrocyte. So the chondrocyte is going to be the like dark. Oh, that did not show up. That would be the chondrocyte. Misspelled it. Chondrocyte. And then like the little white space here. So all this white space, extra white space, is the lacunae. But this gives it a very recognizable look under the microscope. So you see all of these cells in these little white pockets. Hyaline cartilage is going to be in areas here, like we have connecting the like chest bone to the rib cage. And like cartilage, like other types of cartilage, it helps like support and reinforce areas. And a lot of cartilage provides a cushion because a lot of bones are sometimes put under a lot of pressure. So in between bones, like the vertebra we'll look at in a little bit, has a different type of cartilage, but cartilage in general tends to offer support and is really highly resistant to stress. All right, the next type of cartilage we're looking at is elastic cartilage. So similar to hyaline cartilage, but it has much more elastic fibers. And this makes it really good at being more flexible. So just like the elastic fibers in just elastic connective tissue, like in the walls of a blood vessel, the elastic fibers here make things very elastic, right? They make it very flexible. So like the artery of a blood vessel could expand and recoil. Here, this isn't in a blood vessel because this is now a form of cartilage, but it's cartilage with additional elastic elastic fibers. So a really good example of this is your ear, your external ear, right? Like if you were to pull on your ear, you can pull on it in a ton of different directions and it always bounces back to its original position. That's because of how strong this cartilage is, and the elastic nature of it allows it to kind of recoil back to its original position. Okay, last one here is fibrocartilage. So for fibrocartilage, it has a large amount of collagen, so it has really, really thick collagen fibers. But also we see a lot more kind of like white spaces in fibrocartilage. So this will be important a little bit later on when we're trying to identify the three types between each other. So a ton of like just white spaces, which I feel like is a very clear identifiable factor for fibrocartilage. Like I was saying earlier, cartilage in general offers a lot of support. Fibrocartilage is really good at absorbing shock. So where we've put a lot of fibrocartilage in terms of like where it is in our body is in our discs. So in our intervertebral discs. Our spine is constantly under a lot of tension as we are upright throughout the day. So if you're walking, running, standing, sitting, as long as you're upright, you're putting pressure on your spine. And your intervertebral discs need to withstand this pressure. They're able to do so because of the high amount of fibrocartilage found within them. We still see chondrocytes, right? So we have those chondrocytes in the lacunae. And again, these are like really identifiable cells for cartilage in general. And we see that up here as well. Right, so we see like cells over here and these little like white pockets. So right, chondrocyte and lacunae over here. So the little like pockets that house the chondrocytes. Okay, so that's it for our dense and our dense, loose, and cartilage connective tissue. Now we're on to just the last two types of connective tissue. So here we have bone. Bone and blood that I'm about to show you are probably extremely identifiable is because they look so different from the other types of connective tissue. So this is a very calcified matrix, right? We see many, many collagen fibers, which are kind of like all the little lines that are stained. So we see a lot of collagen fibers that give bone a lot of its strength, as well as the calcification within its matrix. The osteocytes are the cells found in bones, and these also are in their little lacunae, very similar to chondrocytes. So they're in this little pocket right here. So they have little pockets around them. And then they're organized in these rings. So I think that's a identifiable feature of bones is that these osteocytes are kind of organized in these rings here. So if I were to show you a picture of bone on something like an exam or lab practical, these should be one of the easier ones to identify because of like the rings that they have. Okay, last one is blood. Last type of connective tissue is blood. Blood is also pretty easy to identify because you'll just see a ton of cells. We don't see like fibers, right? We don't see the collagen fibers, reticular fibers, elastic fibers, because in a lot of the previous connective tissue slides we were looking at, there were like lines going everywhere, right? In a lot of different ways. This still does have that ground substance, that extracellular matrix. It's just that the extracellular matrix is called plasma for your blood. So this is like the watery part of your blood. So this is watery part of blood. And then our cells here, didn't fully write. Our cells here are red blood cells and white blood cells. So you'll be able to see this in lab. We'll have slides of blood and you'll just see like these red blood cells everywhere. Okay, so that's it for connective tissue, but we do have just one more slide to show you, a slide of nervous tissue. And this is the last type of tissue that I'm showing you. So we've had epithelial, we've had connective tissue, and then now we have nervous tissue. We haven't talked about muscle tissue yet in lecture, so for right now, this is the last type that I'm showing you. But don't worry, we will get to muscle tissue. We do have a whole unit on neurons later on, so I don't expect you to like know every structure of the neuron, but I just want to show you this to so that you can kind of appreciate how different they look from all of the previous types of slides we've looked at. The cell bodies here of a neuron have a ton of different branches coming off of them. There is a ton of extracellular matrix around them, so there would be like connective tissue supporting this, but that's not really what we're focused on. We're focusing on the nervous tissue itself. So here's what it looks like, just kind of showing it to you and letting you know that this is a type of tissue in our body, but we will have an entire unit on nervous tissue and the nervous system. So we'll kind of come back to this a little bit later. Okay, but I want to use the rest of the time to give you a little quiz. And I wanted to do this because connective tissue is hard. There's so many different types that it can be really hard to try to like orient yourself to what you're looking at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you unlabeled slides, and I want you to try to identify them. What I recommend doing is trying to pause the video when I get to the slide and then see if you can identify it based on you going back through the previous slides that I showed you. So I'll kind of talk about the slide first, and then I'll tell you to pause, and you can give yourself a chance to try to identify it. So I'll show you the types in the group, and you're not like pulling from every single type of connective tissue. I'll have you start with just loose connective tissue, and then I'll show you just dense, and then I'll show you just cartilage. So you only have 3 options to choose from each time, which will help narrow it down. The other thing you could do is you could try to pause the video and go through all of them in the slides that I've posted for you and see if you can name all of them, and then come back and watch the rest of the lecture. But let's start with option number 1. I'm not really going to intro this slide. If you want to pause here and try to identify it, you can. But this one, like I said, is probably the most easy to identify because of these like really large open spaces that we have here. Okay, so this one is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue. And we can tell because of because there's honestly like not a lot on the sides, right? Like there's not a lot of stain on the sides. So fat doesn't stain, but the cells do. So we see a lot of those large pockets of fat, and then we see the nuclei on the sides. All right, next one. So this one, we see some like pockets of blank space. We see a ton of lines. We see a ton of cells. So this has a lot of kind of everything. So we'll say pause here and try to identify it. Once you did, this one is areolar tissue. Again, the way we know that is honestly really from like the little like pockets of just like a lot of empty space here. Obviously not as much empty space on this than the adipose tissue on the previous one, but because we see a little bit of everything, we see a ton of fibers going everywhere. We see a lot of different cell shapes and sizes. This is a really good indication of areolar. So this is our like generic, our kind of prototype of connective tissue because it has everything. Okay, process of elimination. You might not need to pause for this one, but you can if you want. We only have one more option for loose connective tissue, and that is going to be reticular. And the way we can tell it's reticular is because reticular fibers stain really dark here. And then we also see a ton of cells, right? And that those reticular fibers create this sort of mattress and meshwork for these cells to be supported. All right, next 3 I'm going to show you is dense connective tissue. So your options are regular, irregular, and elastic. So let's start with this one. So something that I'd point out is that it looks like these fibers, these collagen fibers, are kind of moving, right? They're all kind of all running parallel. Sorry, not moving. They're like running parallel to each other. So pause here and try to identify it. If you said irregular, you would be correct. So regular connective tissue. And again, I drew these arrows to kind of help point you towards that. So we have just a ton of collagen fiber. These would be in things like tendons and ligaments that are really good at just like stretching in both ways, right? Pulling on a joint to move the skeleton in a certain direction. Okay, we have another one here. Try to pause this and identify it. Okay, this one might have felt a little bit harder. If you looked at the next one, maybe you could figure this one out through process of elimination. But this one, we do have both elastic and collagen fibers present. So the elastic and collagen fibers are going to be stained as like blue and red here. So we see like 2 different types of fibers. And it's still going to be offering a lot of stretch, right, and support and strength. And this type of dense tissue, because it has a large proportion of elastic in addition to collagen, typically going to be found in the walls of blood vessels. Vessels, missed an S. And maybe by me saying that, it can give you a hint as to what it is. This is elastic tissue. Elastic tissue. So it does have collagen to give it strength and be able to stretch, but the elastic allows it to kind of stretch and recoil on itself. Okay, last one for dense tissue. So the actual dense part, like the actual connective tissue part, is this portion. So everything here on the slide. And before you actually identify that, or while you're trying to identify the connective tissue part of this, we can actually see a ton of epithelial tissue here as well. So let's kind of look at what's happening with this epithelial tissue. So I'll zoom in here. So this will be a good review for epithelial tissue. So we see many layers here. So this is going to be stratified. So the basement layer is going to be somewhere around here. So like this is going to be the basal layer of the cells, of the epithelial tissue. And this is going to be outside. So this will be like the apical layer of the epithelial tissue. Now, this epithelial tissue, because it's stratified, we see a ton of cells, and we see that the cells are kind of like changing shape as they go up. So we see that they're kind of cuboidal at the basement, but then they become kind of squamous on top, right? They get really, really flat over here. These are also stained a lot darker than what we've seen in the past. So like these squamous cells have a really dark stain to them. And that's because they're keratinized. So this is actually simple squamous, but you're looking at keratinized squamous cells. So this is actually skin you're looking at, right? So skin has keratin around its cells. It gives it just an extra layer of like durability for these stratified squamous cells. So the fact that this is skin should give you a hint as to what kind of connective tissue this is. So this is a good place to pause and try to guess the connective tissue. If you said irregular, also right, process of elimination. This was the only option left because we had already done regular and elastic. But as I was mentioning earlier in the lecture, with irregular tissue, we have this in places that can go in a lot of different directions, and skin can be pulled in a lot of different directions. So it has that irregular connective tissue below the dermis and epidermis to be able to give it that ability to stretch in a lot of different directions. Okay, last three are cartilage. So we have hyaline, elastic, and fiber cartilage. So let's start with the first one. This one has that kind of glassy appearance, and we see a lot of the chondrocytes and the lacuna housing the chondrocytes. So take a second, pause this, and try to guess it. This one is hyaline. And this one has that glassy appearance that is characteristic of hyaline cartilage. So you'll see this in lab as well. Okay, next one, we have two options left. We have elastic and fiber cartilage. So here we still see the chondrocytes. We see a lot of additional fibers. It no longer has that glassy appearance that the hyaline cartilage has. So please pause this and take a second to try to identify it. Okay, so when you're trying to identify this, we do see a lot of thick collagen fibers. So we see a lot of thick collagen fibers. This is actually pulled from a picture of your intervertebral discs. So this can withstand a lot of stress. And the type of cartilage found in those areas is fiber cartilage. Okay, we have one last type of cartilage here. So process of elimination, right? You can identify this one, but maybe still give yourself a chance to try to pause and identify it. This slide is taken from an area of the epiglottis. So it's part of kind of like the back of your tongue. It's in an area that is exposed to a lot of friction. So we actually have some epithelial layer up here. So we have epithelial layer. We have connective tissue layer here as well. If you wanted, you could try to identify that as well. Then we have our cartilage layer. So what I want you to identify is this cartilage layer. So that's why I pulled this slide. But you could practice with epithelial and connective above it as well, right? So if this is an area that is encountering a lot of friction for epithelial layer, you might want to think something like stratified, and we see a ton of cells over there, and we see that it gets flatter closer to the top. So this would be like stratified squamous. And we don't see that they are stained really dark, the squamous cells on top, like the ones previously, because these are not keratinized. The connective tissue below it, we see that it is kind of going in all different directions. And again, this is an area like near kind of the tongue, and it is required to move in a lot of different directions. So this might be something like dense irregular connective tissue below that gives it a lot of strength, but also a lot of flexibility to move in a lot of different areas and different angles. So finally, the cartilage. The cartilage here, similarly to kind of what this area is found in, being uh, near like the tongue and in this area that has to be very flexible. This is going to be our elastic cartilage. So this area is able to stretch more than different areas of cartilage. So it gives it a slightly more flexible structure. We still see a lot of the identifiable components of cartilage, though. We see the chondrocytes and the lacunae, and that really gives away that this is a form of cartilage. It doesn't really have that glassy look like the hyaline cartilage does, and it doesn't have the sort of extracellular matrix here that we're seeing from a lot of collagen fibers, like in fiber cartilage above. So this is another way to kind of help eliminate that this is elastic cartilage. Okay, and that's the end of our connective tissue lecture.